Okay, yeah, well, I'm just giving people a few seconds just to dial in audio. I can see a few more people arriving. I'm George. I'm your host for this talk. I'll be guiding questions later on. There'll be a few questions our panel will be talking to, which when I think everybody's arrived, I'll just let a few more people get in. I'll give you an introduction to everybody. The idea is in this, yeah, I can see a few people have got video going. You are sort of encouraged to turn your video off slightly as well, just to help with bandwidth, and stay muted, please, while the talk's going on. And you can direct questions to me or Leslie or maybe just everybody in the chat. And when the discussion's kind of over, when the directed questions are finished, we'll pick out a few questions to put to our panel. So ideally, if you say in the chat, if your question is directed to any member of our panel in particular, just mention that in your question, just so you know. For instance, question to Charles, question to Oliver, Richard, Andrea, etc. Hopefully that's clear for everybody. I guarantee when we start, a few more people will pop in, because that's what always happens. But yeah, we're 5:35. So we will begin the special Q&A on St Maud, which has just been released on Friday. Some of you may have seen the film, some of you won't have done. I did decide we'd say, you know, there may be accidental spoilers creep out, so you have been warned, you know, but we'll try and avoid anything like that. Yeah, so I will introduce our panel we have here lined up for us. Just next to me here, and he's so good, he's actually hosting it via his bandwidth and his Zoom. We have Richard Knight from Screen Yorkshire. There he is. He's giving a little wave there. Richard has worked as production liaison. He's worked on This Is England, Four Lions. He's just been regaling me with Tales of Robin Hood's Bay, to which I agree. Yeah, and he's currently working production liaison for Script Yorkshire, and you work in education as well to do with Script Yorkshire, don't you, Richard? Yeah. And then just moving along the list next to me, Oliver Kassman with his unsubtle St Maud background there. He's joining us from somewhere up in Scotland, I think he said he was. So if he suddenly disappears, we know the bandwidth has gone. But yeah, Oliver, yeah, assistant production. Florence Foster Jenkins, I noticed on your IMDb page.
Yeah.
IMDb page that was mentioned. So you're involved in that. He's worked as producer on St Maud. And next to Oliver there, Charles Christian just joined us. Charles, what a fantastic time I had reading about what you've been up to. I won't mention werewolf hunting, but then again, by saying that, I just have. Yeah, you host Weird Tales Radio, which you've just been joining us from a radio show, haven't you? We were just waiting. But yeah, an expert on ghosts and urban folklore. You lived in Scarborough.
I did indeed.
Yeah, so you know the area well. You know the ghostly tales. So we might be directing some folklore questions your way.
Yeah.
Next to Charles there, we have Andrea Cornwall, the other producer on St Maud. Yeah, I was looking this up, Andrea. Lots of documentary work, and you've got an upcoming project with Keira Knightley. Is that correct? Yeah, there's a nod there. Yeah.
Yes, that's a long story. But,
yeah, it's a long story. I won't say too much. Yeah.
But, yes, I've done mostly fiction features, but in the last couple of years, I have produced a couple of documentary features as well. So that's been a bit of a new departure for me.
Yeah. So yeah, good. Thank you for that, Andrea. Put me straight on that one. Yeah. It's interesting to look up. So that's our panel: Richard, Oliver, Andrea, and Charles there. As I say, I'll give them some directed questions. So quite keen to focus some questions on its use. St Maud, you may have seen the trailer. You'll know part of the filming is done in Scarborough on the Yorkshire coast. So we're going to direct a few questions with that theme in mind. And then, yeah, please, when the talk's going on, send some questions into chat and we'll pick out some we'll answer towards the end. First things first, to set the ball rolling. You may have seen the trailers there, St Maud. There's a bit of walking going on Scarborough seafront there, past the arcades. I'll throw this one out to whoever in the panel wants to answer it. Why the Yorkshire coast? Why Scarborough? Why come to film there?
Shall I kick off, Oliver? Um, it's a script that was always set by the coast, but not initially scripted as Scarborough. But I think for Rose Glass, who wrote and directed, it was something that she always felt like the characters needed to be sort of thematically on the edge of a place and to be kind of pushed out socially. And there was a very good sense of a coastal town to represent all of that idea, and somewhere where there's a huge amount of life and social activity that our main character feels very excluded from. It's definitely a story in part about a character who's very lonely and what that does to her choices. But I mean, why Scarborough? We wanted it a film that was going to hark back to classic 1970s cinema and some of the horrors that we all loved, and it's just very cinematic. There was a fantastic sense of the town concentrating around that Crescent Bay, and you know, from the grand Victorian architecture and, you know, from the Grand Hotel and all the other buildings, you really get a feeling of this quite beautiful and elegant town, but she is very much not part of, and she's sort of pushed out into the fringes. So yeah, it was a process of quite a long scouting period. But Scarborough definitely felt like a place that looked like a movie.
Yeah, that's good. I'll throw that one out to you. Oliver, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think Andrea explains it absolutely, and it was you know, I've been coming to Yorkshire all my life, and you know, it's an amazing part of the country, and so it's very exciting to be able to film there. And you know, I was just sad that we didn't get to spend more time on the moors, which is what, you know, where my heart and soul likes to wander. But it was no, Scarborough had in particular, you know, it's so beautiful one minute and perhaps just slightly threatening the next. So it was perfect.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I come in
1
on?
minute slightly threatening. Yeah, Charles, anything to add in there?
Yeah, I mean, I was born and brought up in Scarborough, and my background picture was shot from the roof of my parents' house, which is just by the harbour. And one of the things that you notice when you live there is that there's a big divide. There's the ancient part of Scarborough, the old part, and the Edwardian grandeur, and you say the Grand Hotel, all the houses on the South Cliff, all the houses leading up to the castle. And you get a lot of people there going to retire. But because the tourist industry died, package tours came along and you could go to Spain for half the price of going to Scarborough. Lots and lots of private hotels, as they were then called, have gone over to DSS housing and the likes. So you've got a large number of people who are living on benefits and are very much, for want of a better word, the underclass. So you've got this big contrast there between the image of what people think it is and what it really is when the sun's gone down and when the holidaymakers have gone away in the winter.
Very true. Yeah. Yeah. Living nearby and then working Sky Yak, and that. Yeah, it's two sides to one story there. Thanks, Charles. Yeah, Richard. I mean, anything you want to chip in on that one?
Yeah, basically, I think one thing to think of is where else it could have been. If you think about the South Coast and the sort of White Cliffs and the Kent area, when you're an hour from London, you don't get that same sense of remote feeling. Cornwall just is tourist central, and you then, for the sake of the story, I wouldn't have thought you'd want it in a sort of quaint little seaside village or anything. I think Scarborough, as the other panel have said, has got this history, and it's so incongruous. You've got this giant hotel that's sort of landed in one bit, and the sort of the big funicular railway as well. It's just fundamentally weird when you go. The first time I went as a child, it stayed in my memory forever, because it's just sort of such an unusually arresting kind of place that just there's nowhere else really like it.
And not the chocolate box image that you might get with somewhere else. Say.
It's got beauty, but it's got as my background in locations as a location scout, it's fantastic. It's just so cinematic. You point the camera and you get interesting images. They might not be the images you had in mind when you set out, but you get like such an incredible range there.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah. Excellent answers on that. Just to make sure all the panel had chance to speak now, you see. Following on, actually, I mean, Charles touched on this a little bit, and I think maybe I'll let Charles kick off with an answer to this question. Is the Yorkshire coast, in particular, sort of that Scarborough, that Whitby Scarborough area of the coast, is it a natural home for horror, particularly on film? There's another question. Charles, please enlighten me.
Yeah, well, I mean, Whitby is where Dracula landed in the novel, and is, it's Goth Central, or it certainly was Goth Central back before we had lockdown. And then you've got, was mentioned earlier, Richard was mentioning the moors, which are very bleak and some parts almost positively surreal when you're going across the moors and you suddenly see the Fylingdales early warning system. Then there's Scarborough, there's all the cliffs heading away, there's the Yorkshire Wolds, which again, I suppose one of the things is not many people live around there. It's relatively small, it's a rural area. Though you're only 60 miles away from West Yorkshire and large conurbations, it's an empty area. And your imagination can wander. Those empty forests that are up there, Dalby and places like that, and the moors and wolds, and the long shores and the long beaches, and it's just got that eeriness, which, and it's unspoilt. There are large areas where you aren't going to see a tower block or lots of electricity pylons. You can very much slip back into an older time. Robin Hood's Bay is a classic there with the beach and the cliffs there.
And sense of sort of timeless terror, we could say.
Yes.
Yeah, two sides to it. Yeah, timeless terror. I mean, on that, natural home for horror in that area. Would anybody else on the panel like to chip in that one? I mean,
well, I mean, only to say, I think Andrea said it at the start as well. Just that I think that for the coast, we are, as an island nation, it's kind of ingrained in our history, the sort of coast and exploring. We all go to the coast. We stare out at the infinite that you just don't get, obviously, inland. And I think the coast lends itself to horror just for the simple, that sort of sense of being on the edge, the sort of unknown, and that it just taps into something deeply ingrained in our psyche. I find whenever I go to the coast, and especially somewhere like Scarborough, which has got a history of just, you've got tradition of fishing and whaling, and just that whole process of reaching the limit of our boundaries and then looking at what is beyond those. It just kind of has a natural place for the sort of British horror vernacular, I think.
As Andrea said, perhaps somewhere on the edge. It's on the edge, which ties in a lot with the film, things being on the edge. I think, yeah, good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go on, Andrea, sorry.
It certainly was for us. I did a very brief look online knowing I was going to do this, because we didn't seek to kind of directly emulate any films that were shot in Yorkshire. We were trying to carve our own path, and I thought I was being clever by going, American Werewolf in London, of course, one of my favourites. It's but then of course it's set in Yorkshire but shot in Wales, so it's a terrible example. But yeah, I mean, we certainly found that it was a natural place for us to get that atmosphere. We shot in the winter, and we shot quite a bit at night as well. So you know, we were using. I mean, filmmakers love wet pavements and neon lights and reflections. So we're leaning into all of that. There's a shot in our film which is I'll call it an homage rather than a rip-off of Taxi Driver, where Maud is going on the pavement, finds a drummer, and along the arcade front in Scarborough. And you know, so it's not a horror per se, but it's certainly a sort of a dystopia of a sort in Taxi Driver. And you know, we found that parts of it felt almost quite American. You know, you're leaning into the sort of Americana. So yeah, I mean, if we were definitely chasing atmosphere, and that's what we found.
Yeah, some reviews have compared. They've mentioned Taxi Driver in the reviews, which is interesting on the edge.
Big influence.
Yeah. That's interesting to hear. Yeah. So natural home for horror. I mean, you were leading on to this really, what you were saying, Andrea. Another question I've been prompted. Interesting stories from filming. I mean, any specific locations in Scarborough you knew you had to have? You know, that shot, that location had to be in the film.
I don't know, Oliver.
Well, yeah. I mean, we were all very keen on the arcades, and one thing that's been quite nice is because one of the arcades there is called Coney Island, and that's the one that features in the trailer, and we've had lots of audiences in America saying it doesn't look like Coney Island. We're saying no, it's Scarborough in Yorkshire. But,
This is the original one.
Yeah, it's the original. Well, we went down to the you know, the south of South Bay, where you've got the old outdoor dance. On
the Spa.
Yeah, the Spa. Thank you. And so we shot some things around there, which I really like. That's just kind of really extraordinary bit of Scarborough that it's kind of tucked away down there, and you kind of think and also the beach gets quite rocky around there, and so we had a lot of fun there. That was very nice. We really wanted to use because of course you get those very steep steps down to the beach, especially on South Bay, and those alleyways down. Those feature quite prominently in the film. And you know, it was important. As we say, it was so specifically Scarborough, and yet it's never mentioned that it's Scarborough. And we kind of felt that Scarborough was the place, in the extent that it was a place that was very specific but never defined. And of course, one of the sort of unique things about Scarborough is that it's indefinable. So we wanted to lean into that very heavily. And as Andrea was saying, with the reflections, lots of kind of using the wet pavement, the wet sands, dealing with the tides. As those who've seen the film, it ends on the beach, and don't look too closely at the continuity of where the sea is. But it's yeah. So we didn't. I think in a way it would have been nice if we could use more. I think that, you know, we just scratched the surface of what Scarborough has to offer.
We did have actually a few things that didn't quite make the film, but were quite amusing. We were going to film more around some of the back streets, just a few shots, and again, without giving spoilers for people who haven't seen the film, but it's sort of, it doesn't end so great for Maud, but you know, like, she's on a bit of a down spiral, and we had a sense of her floating. We wanted her to literally kind of appear like she's floating, which was more trying to depict her in a mindset. And one of us had a bright idea that we'd get one of those Segway boards that we could put her on, so that we could not see her feet and have her sort of like seeming like she's sort of floating through the streets. And Morva, our actress, is not the most coordinated person, I'm sure she wouldn't mind me saying, and we were desperately trying to teach her to ride this thing around various car parks on the seafront. And so yes, the idea was we were going to have her floating around back streets of Scarborough, but I'm afraid she never quite mastered it. No.
Cobblestones would have been a problem.
Yes, the story does have a happy ending though, because those hoverboards are very popular with kids, and it ended up going to our Grip's son for Christmas. So that was,
exactly. He was the winner.
Yeah.
What's that thing? There's that scene in The Railway Children, Jenny Agutter. It's like she's got Heelys in 1970 when she flirts at the birthday party. You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
It was invented then. Yeah. Kind of the flirting. Yeah. Getting a couple of questions coming in on the chat now. I feel one of these may have been answered slightly already, but I've got a question from Diane Rogers. She'd be interested to know. This is to anybody. Are there any specific 1970s films, TV titles that inspired any of you in the film?
Yes. lots of 70s. I mean, Rose is very keen on early Polanski. So Rosemary's Baby was a really key title. Is that 60s? I thought that was 70s. Isn't it 1970?
Just to say 60s, 68.
68. Sorry. Okay. Well, as you say, Taxi Driver was very important. Yeah. No, it's important actually. What other 70s ones were we looking at, Andrea? I mean,
Don't Look Now, Taxi Driver. Earlier. Repulsion, I think, is also 60s.
That's 60s, definitely 60s.
Gosh, I mean, we're all sort of massive fans of kind of Alien and The Thing, and whether they're not direct story insights into St. Maud particularly, but certainly for a bit of a vibe and the way of holding back horror. It's not chasing jump scares, and it's all about building dread and psychological horror. So certainly a lot of that kind of atmosphere that you find from cinema of that period absolutely was what we were looking for in St. Maud.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, I'm just nodding along. I mean, one thing, no spoilers, but for me watching it, obviously Sunset Boulevard, and it does get a reference, but we're talking 50s there. There is that little bit of sort of gothic.
In check for Norman Desmond, yeah.
Yeah, Diane thanked you on Twitter. Yeah, she's pleased with the response there. So that's a list of films to go out and rewatch or discover. Excellent. I'm well aware we'll have to keep Richard in the frame as well. But next question is from Dave C. Now, this might be one for Charles to kick off with. Was the story based or inspired by any specific legends, folklore, any reported supernatural experiences? I'll throw that one out there.
Oh, there are ghost stories around Scarborough and certainly around the seafront, and certainly some of the big houses, including the Grand Hotel. I don't think there's any really quite specific that would be a direct inspiration for St. Maud.
Tell us about the Grand Hotel, though. What haunts that?
Well, the Grand Hotel is actually built on the site where one of the Brontes used to stay, and she's buried up in the churchyard by the castle. And there's repeated sightings of a woman in early 19th century dress drifting through the corridors of the Grand Hotel. And it's so huge, there must have been deaths and unhappiness and things that you generally believe cause ghosts to walk lurking around there.
Which Bronte sister is it, Charles?
I think it's Anne Bronte.
It is Anne. Yeah.
The one everyone forgets, sadly.
She's buried in the churchyard near the castle, isn't she? The grave is there. Yeah.
That church is incredible as well. We're sad not to be able to use that, where it's been scarified by the wind, and it's absolutely beautiful. Just amazing church, actually. Stunning. Yeah.
And I should say it ties back into location, but obviously, you have the castle at Scarborough as well. Was it not tempting to try and shoehorn that in the film somewhere?
Yeah, we wouldn't have had a place. That's the thing. You end up with such an odd list when you have a script that you need, a a chip shop, and you need the front door of a house, and you need, I've often thought the best way to make films would really be to wander around a place and kind of go, that looks cool, let's write it in, but it never seems to happen that way. But presumably, Richard, the castle's been used for a few things.
Yeah, none that I particularly know, to be honest. Personally, no, I don't know. It's come up. I've sent it as an idea to numerous productions that are interested, but none that I know of have taken it up. Maybe
opportunity for someone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know myself. When you get up there near the castle, all sorts of stories of haunted houses up near the castle and up there. And, yeah, maybe too creepy for to film up there. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just looking. Yeah, anybody else? Please fire in any questions on the chat. Don't be shy. Yeah, I mean, I guess question for Charles. I mean, Charles, I take it you've seen the film. Does it feed in? Does it draw from any kind of folklore or legends around the world? Are there any similar real life events that mirror this?
I wouldn't have said so, but it's a fairly widespread concept of people having sort of a religious obsession and wanting to, believing they have some kind of holy drive behind them. Lots of people that have wounds that supposedly are inflicted by spirits and things. So it's a common theme, but it tends to be a more, I suppose, on the fringes of mental illness rather than folklore and ghost lore.
Back to that theme of being on the edge again, and the coast and the location, and
there is an actual Saint Maud, and she's German, and she's got an association with, I think she died by burning. There's certainly, as you can see the flames behind Oliver, there's a bit of burning theme in our film. But Rose claimed not to have sort of taken her inspiration from the actual Saint Maud. I think it was a name that came first. And
I mean, the closest was Joan of Arc. The hearing voices. Rose did quite a lot of research into that. She had that potentially Joan of Arc had a certain form of epilepsy. There is one that has euphoric visions that can be quite sexualized as well. And the idea of someone who has a relationship with the voice in their head, now we might be tempted to say that they're insane, and in the past people might have thought that they were talking to God. That idea of Maud being sort of somehow out of her time was always quite important, and perhaps part of the tragedy as well.
Yeah,
I think that was really well done with the choices of costume and production design. Her Maud's environment, it could be straight out of any time, really. There's not an awful lot about her place that she lives in. Everything is just so timeless.
Yeah,
which works really well.
That was deliberate. I mean, it's obviously contemporary, and you do see modern technology and realise that it's now. But it's we wanted it to be a bit kind of ambiguous, and the interior of Amanda's house, which the exterior is a big Edwardian house, but inside it's quite Art Deco, and she's got quite sort of retro tastes. Certainly, the things that Maud ends up being interested in are more medieval saints, and there's all the William Blake as well, which he obviously is of a Victorian era, but harking back to sort of earlier. So so we're constantly playing with different periods and trying to put a little outside everything.
Yeah, that was my next line of question. I was thinking actually that these William Blake pictures do feature in the film. I wondered, was that in the script, or is that part of the set design? Was that added afterwards?
No, it was scripted as Blake, and it was a relatively late addition that came in to the script. But yeah, but when you make a film, obviously you have to clear everything. There's endless forms you have to fill in, showing that you've kind of cleared any images or sound that you hear that is not of your own creation. So yeah, the minute we saw that bit in the book, me and Oliver sort of gave a big sigh, because there's, you know, her flicking through books of William Blake paintings, and it's one of the, I won't bore you too much with it, but it's one of the sort of oddities of copyright law, that even though William Blake's been dead for long enough that none of the pictures are in copyright, the galleries that hold the paintings take photographs them, and therefore any image of it that you are able to get your paws on have a new copyright created by the photographer. It's a great wheeze that they've all come up with. So every single picture in that book had to be individually cleared from the gallery that hosts it. It's quite an undertaking. I'm quite familiar with where William Blake's are around the world now. So, yeah, I know way more than I want to know about it.
It was one of those questions, you know, when obviously you're watching the film, and I thought, well, yeah, there's William Blake images, and I say they're scripted, they just have to get clearance for some kind of images.
She flipped through it at one point, and we're all just like, oh, don't pause at the wrong page.
I mean, you led on to this with talking like, you know, set design, production design, costume. I mean, watching it, there is interesting patterns on the wallpaper and on certain items of clothing. I mean, you know, should we be reading into that when we're watching the film? Are there sort of subliminal images that are there for the audience to perhaps read things into?
I think there's a certain symbolic order in the film that's driven, you know, but it's actually, I think it's driven by the symbolism of the aesthetic as in and of itself. As you say, it's that kind of timeless feel, it's the tone, it's the atmosphere. The text is there for people to read as they like, of course, you know, so we're not, you know, in control of that, but there wasn't a specific meaning behind, say, the wood paneling or the William Morris wallpaper or the wallpaper in Maud's room, outside of that they are chosen by Rose and our production designer Paulina to dramatize and represent the interiority of the characters. You know, Amanda's house is very much a reflection of her having been quite a glamorous world traveller. You know, she's got quite an eclectic collection of stuff, and it's designed in quite a kind of sexy and unusual way. You know, of course, Maud's terrible little bedsit in a basement, you know, is designed in a certain way. The props, the lack of quality to the furnishings.
But you have accidents that came out there, weren't there? I mean, there's yes, most of the wallpapers were chosen. Actually, the one where she goes up the stairs and has a kind of visitation from God, which is quite a key sequence, is that was actually in the house, and it sort of ended up being something that the design was kind of coordinated around. And there's an extraordinary window on that staircase which looks like a church window, and that actually was in the house. It was one of the reasons we sort of first selected it, because it has this sort of strange religious quality that looks down over that whole entrance hall. And there was a few other bits as well. I mean, there is bits of, I think I was talking to someone earlier about the very opening of the film. You see a flashback to Maud's past and something that's gone wrong in a hospital context, and you see this patient with her hair hanging right the way down to the ground. And we created some dance posters for Amanda, whose house she's the woman that she's caring for, and in exactly the same pose, but this time it's a contemporary dance shot. And then we actually created some of the video of experimental contemporary dance that Amanda would have done when she was younger. And again, we're leaning into those kind of repeated poses, so that there is a through line through some of the design that takes you through, you know, different settings, different poses. You know, you do get repeated imagery. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, it was just me picking up on it, you see, but yeah.
No. You often do in films. and certain colours become significant. And people often pick out something like red, particularly. We play a little bit with that and the idea of blood, and certain colours are often quite effective if you exclude them and then use them in very certain ways. And we certainly did a bit of that in St Maud.
It's certainly an interesting colour palette in there, which I know has been commented on in some reviews. But,
yeah, people notice.
Another question. You like this one? This is to Andrea and Oliver. Has this crazy year we're having affected the release of the film? Were you always intending to release it in October?
It's been very easy and straightforward and no problem whatsoever.
Yeah. Oh, God. Yeah, no, it was, you probably know, but it was going to be released in May, which who knew, turned out to be not the greatest month to release movies. So here we are, still battling. It's been strange for everybody. It's obviously at some level it's particularly upsetting in the film business, because there's so much kind of art and culture, all the cultural industries that are getting so heavily impacted by what's going on. But we're not alone in that. Nobody's unaffected by this. So I think any feelings we have about the film are just amplified by the fact that so many people are having difficulties caused by this. We're obviously really pleased to get the film out now and to find an audience. We're thrilled to bits that it's had such an amazing critical reception. And the hope is now, even though it's a sort of very strange time to be out in cinemas with picture houses and what have you sort of closing, the hope is that we will continue being in cinemas for much longer than you might normally. So we'll be sticking around throughout Halloween, hopefully beyond, so people will get a chance to see it.
One advantage, a long lead in time, and Halloween's coming up. Yeah. One question now. I'm probably glad I'm on Zoom. You might kick me for asking this, but all over reviews, and I notice on Twitter there's debate. Would you call this psychological horror? Is this, dare I say, is this folk horror? Where would you place the film? I'll throw that open to any of our panel. Perhaps Charles wants to chip in as well on that. What would you call it?
Oh, I'd call it psychological horror, but I know folk horror is very much a vogue term now, and there's a huge folk horror revival group on Facebook, so it is very much the buzzword. But I'd say it was more in the psychological horror front. Folk horror, really, it's Witchfinder General and Satan's Claw and a few and the Wicker Man. Obviously there's fire in it, so there is an element of Wicker Man, but I'd say it's more psychological horror.
I personally, I get very upset sometimes by these distinctions in a way. I agree with Charles. I don't think it's a folk horror personally. I think maybe you call it a psychological horror. The thing that I don't like as an idea is elevated horror. People talk about elevated genre movies and elevated horror, and I find that distinction very troubling, because there's plenty of incredible movies made. Robert Rodriguez's Canon, for example, that are extraordinary pieces of filmmaking, but they're not elevated horrors or elevated genre pieces. And I think there's a certain kind of snobbery that goes into that term, and all people really mean by it is good, and everyone wants to make good genre movies, and no one has, but no one controls the definition of what is good or bad. I think that we did struggle. What do we call it? Do we call it a horror? Do we call it a thriller? Do we call it a drama? Do we call it a chiller? Do we, what do we call it? But I think, happily, these days, there is a bit more of a sense that something is just generally quite genre-ish, in that it's not necessarily trying to be reality. It's not realism, and the audience is quite open as to what that means. I think, and perhaps because the James Wans of this world make the kind of those more kind of straight down the line horrors so ingeniously and so brilliantly, it gives everyone else a bit more room to push the conventions of the genres.
I think as well, we're living in an age of probably the most sophisticated audiences we've ever had, because because of the global distribution model of film and the likes of Netflix and Amazon and those kind of things, that we're constantly having genres, genre boundaries broken all the time. We're totally used to it as an audience now. We just love a good story, and we don't, I think this in particular, it's deeply psychological. It's affecting me psychologically now, having watched it. And so, yeah, I don't think it really matters so much as it used to, maybe.
It's a funny one though, isn't it? Because I think with anything that's not just a drama, there is a sort of secondary bar that you have to hit. It's not just good or bad and did I like it? Like with a comedy, if you make a comedy, it's like, is it a good film? Did I like it? Is it funny? And if you're not considered funny enough, then people will kind of unpick you, quite rightly, probably. But and same with horror. We were scared of the word horror because we thought, well, there is a kind of particular audience for that genre, and they can be quite vocal if they don't feel like you've delivered them certain things, or you've done it in ways, or it's the perennial chase to find novelty, and have you done it in a fresh enough way. So we were a bit like, oh god, is it going to be, are we enough of a horror to satisfy that crowd? And then we played the film for the very first time. Nobody in the world had seen it at Midnight Madness in Toronto, which is very prestigious international film festival, and the sidebar for genre, and everyone's drunk, it's midnight, and they're thinking, oh my god, are they going to just go nuts when it's just a lot of conversation happening? And they loved it, and the film does crank up, and it does deliver horror beats in it. So yeah, I think it gave us a bit of confidence. Actually, no, we can play to that crowd as well, and they do get it and respect the film.
Yeah, I certainly a loaded question. I knew it would be when I asked that, but I could see that of lots of things going around. I mean, yeah, I've been involvement in folk horror myself, and when you see somebody banding the term around, you think, now steady on. Yeah, I'll be out with my copy of Witchfinder General. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the other word as well that gets thrown around is magical realism. That was a buzzword going around as well. But yeah, we better not open that kind of worms then. Yeah. Oh, excellent. We've just had another question come in from Marie Miller. Independent cinema near her showed The Runaways. If you're familiar with that one, that was another film filmed on the Yorkshire Coast. The Children and the Donkeys, that one. All a very similar area. Yeah, the North York Moors, the coast, near Robin Hood's Bay part of it. Very few people saw it. I think you may have answered this already, but yeah, will you have more screenings? I mean, do you hope to hold out in independent cinemas for a bit longer? With plenty of screenings.
Yeah, we certainly hope so. I mean, it will obviously depend on word of mouth and people coming out and seeing it. So, we're very grateful that people have, enjoyed the film so far. And, every time people take to Twitter and talk about it, it's helpful to us. I mean, we've got fantastic partners in Studio Canal who are putting the film out. At this stage, we're, as long as people keep coming up and seeing the film, then cinemas will hopefully keep booking it and playing it.
Yeah, big must see for Halloween. I think that's what we need to keep saying. Everybody needs to go and see it for Halloween. Yep. Obviously, social distance safe as it is. Yeah, keep watching. Yep. I will put. Yeah, has anybody got any burning questions they want to ask? Please don't be shy. Please fire something away via the chat. Speak now. It's no good suddenly having a question you desire to ask just after you've seen the film. Now is the time to ask. We've put the folk horror things to bed. Yeah. Or probably not now. Yeah. And somebody's just starting a fire outside my window now. They're after me. Right. Well, okay. I mean, just winding down then, just to give people a chance to fire in their last minute questions. the inevitable question I always tend to ask at my Q&As. Any amusing stories from filming that you can share? I mean, obviously we've had this kind of skateboard type incident, but any other sort of interesting things that happened during filming?
It's hard to know what you can repeat, isn't it? It's,
yeah.
What's going to get
anything ghostly or ghastly, I think, is perhaps the way to.
Well, I mean, Nancy was very, very popular. So eagle-eyed viewers will notice in the credits that Nancy is our cockroach in the film, who you can see in the trailers as well. She is a Cuban peppered cockroach, to be precise, and
not native to Yorkshire, it has to be said.
Not really well, but where's Grace, her handler and breeder, based? Maybe, yeah, no, I don't think she's Yorkshire, is she? But you know, having Nancy was a big hit. She has a partner called Sid. She came to set. Everyone fell in love with her, and you know, she was sort of, everyone was a bit sort of morbidly fascinated by all the creepy crawlies at first, and then we all kind of fell in love with Nancy, and so we had to credit her, and her handler Grace was very pleased.
For the people who haven't seen the film, it's a cockroach which is about sort of, I don't know, it's a good 12, 14 centimeters long, if not longer, which appears at various moments. It talks at one point. I won't say any more, but in a fairly surprising way. So yes, that was certainly a good addition. It was supposed to be a moth, and then our handler came and said that it was the wrong time of year and couldn't find any moths, but would we like one of these? So suddenly in comes Nancy.
George, one of the issues with asking that question is that when we make films, there's a lot of drama and incident that goes on around the camera, but what happens pretty quickly after, it certainly does to me, is I get an almost immediate sense of nostalgia for it as soon as I've finished, and then all of these difficulties go away and just get packaged as kind of, oh, that was a fun, really enjoyed that project. It's the only thing that keeps me sane and keeps me going for the next one. So it's not always easy to go back and unpick things that happened, because a lot of things happen, but then pretty rapidly after them, you put it behind you and carry on making the film, and the end product is the focus.
It also was a particularly happy shoot, this one. So, you know, very often you get cases where everybody sort of hated each other and, you know, there's pranks or what have you, but actually genuinely we were boringly all kind of getting on famously.
We have had a question, just coming in here. Hugh Mann Adamson. Yeah, I mean, this is obviously seen the film, but it's not a spoiler to talk about it. Yeah, was narration? Why was narration chosen? Just intrigued. I mean, there is a little bit of narration in this, isn't there? You know, was that scripted? You know, any ideas behind that?
Yeah,
it was certainly scripted. I mean, people get very exercised about voiceover and narration, and you know, we definitely tried to get a balance that it was motivated by her. You know, it's her private prayers and her kind of chats with God that she has. But I think some people don't like narration in film. Personally, I do quite like it, and it certainly never bothers me. But it was the original, from the very first thought, you know, spark of the idea in Rose's head. It was a story about a girl who has a relationship with the voice in her head. So, you know, having some kind of dramatization of that relationship was always kind of very, very important, even if it's, you know, predominantly a one-way conversation.
Yeah. I think it tied in with that slightly film noir element I felt there was there. You know, it is there. It's a bit of fun there.
It's some of the funniest bits in the film, I think, are part of the narration as well. It did enable us to get quite an, you know, I mean, she's a very funny actor, Morpeth, and she's so deadpan. And, you know, they start out as quite serious feeling connection with her, but you realise, I mean, they're almost like diary entries at certain points. They are terribly amusing.
Unreliable narrator, perhaps.
Oh yeah, definitely. Definition of, yeah.
Yeah, well, we've almost had our time. I've had just a message from Bobby to everybody. Thinks the film was fantastic, a fantastic contribution to British cinema. Nice to see something rather than the kitchen sink drama that seems to be, I suppose that's Britain's reputation in cinema. I mean, arguably there's a bit of kitchen sink in St Maud, isn't there, really? But it's all in there. And there's a pub scene as well, so there we go. So.
Yeah, we had to have a kitchen sink in. I think she sets fire to something in it, though, so it's not the usual.
Folk horror kitchen sink, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. With that, then, any final questions? Because we'll wind down. Please, speak now. Anybody, fire something away in that chat. Yeah, it's better than sort of bombarding us, but yeah. That might be our lot. So, well, with that, then, I guess I'll bid everybody, thank you for our Q&A. Certainly nice meeting everybody via Zoom. Yeah, Charles, it's nice to hear from you. Yeah, we're getting some claps here. Yeah, people are saying it's great and they love the film. That's good. That's all cropping for the chat now. So, if that's okay with everybody, we'll bring this to a close, I guess. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank
Lovely
you,
to meet
Andrea,
you all.
Charles, Oliver, Richard, and all those who've attended our Zoom.
Thanks everyone for seeing the film as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks. Bye. Bye.
Right.